If you've ever watched a championship debate or a compelling courtroom scene, you know that winning an argument isn't just about facts. It's about a secret playbook, a series of unspoken rules and psychological tactics the experts use that beginners never learn. Most beginners walk into a debate trying to argue everything, they overload on data, they shout, and they attack the opponent's character. And they lose. Why? Because they're missing the 10 essential secrets that shift the entire framework of the discussion. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're going to form a nervous beginner to a confident, strategic speaker by revealing the 10 most valuable secrets professional debaters use. These aren't just tips, they are non negotiable foundations to victory. Let's start the clock. A great debater doesn't just need responses, they need to engineer the entire argument space they're dealing with. That's the core truth. These 10 secrets are split into three categories: foundation, in round tactics, and advanced mastery. Forget what you think about winning. Real victory only comes from control, clarity, and the calculated use of logical leverage. We are going to dive right into the first four secrets, the foundational pillars of preparation and strategy. If you miss these four, the other six won't save you. The first one, debating the link and not the fact. Most beginners waste all their time finding obscure facts. The expert debater knows that facts are rarely debatable. The connection between them is. This is the difference between data and warrant. Don't just present the statistics, debate the logic that links that statistic to your claim. Practically, you have to look at if your opponent cites a study that you don't find a competing study. Instead, attack their warrant. The study on consumer behavior is invalid because it was conducted before the rise of social media. The link between those findings and today's market is broken, is one very good example of the same. The second secret is defining the terms and defining the fight that you're going to have. This is the secret that lets you frame the entire round. Whoever successfully defines the key ambiguous terms in the resolution often controls the entire flow of the argument. A beginner lets their opponents define success. A pro defines it themselves. If the topic is the government should increase surveillance, a smart debater doesn't just argue for or against. They first say we define surveillance not just as camera monitoring but as any collection of metadata. By broadening the term, they make their case much stronger right out of the gate, and they also give themselves more potential to explore different forms of arguments that are still relevant towards the framework of the debate. This is also one thing that is going to help you if you are also struggling against a case of the opposition. The third secret is the stock issue checklist, what you need and not need. Every single persuasive argument, from sales to policy, relies on proving a need. Stock issues are the traditional preset questions you must answer to prove a need for change. If you don't check these boxes, your proposal is automatically weak. So, what does this checklist look like? The first thing on the checklist is significance. You have to highlight if the current problem is big enough to matter. What we inherently mean by this is that if it is also something that is going to be impacting the major stakeholders of your debate arguments or the motion that is dealing with these stakeholders itself. The second portion in this checklist is inherency. Is the problem caused by the current system and not temporary bad luck? So, this would inherently look at different policy frameworks which are going to be problematic or why these problems stem for the inherent lack of better systems currently present instead of temporary things which can easily be flipped by the opposition side. The third part of this checklist is solvency. Will your proposed plan actually fix the problem? You can't just go over time and look at things on the surface. You have to go in depth and see if this proposed plan would be dealing with the nature of what the problem actually is, and if the policy framework or the changes that you're proposing as ways in your argumentation are actually going to be meaningful and tangibly fix the problem that is essentially there and has been identified as the motion. The next one is practical application. A beginner just talks about a problem or its significance. A pro would explicitly map out that our opponent agrees the problem is significant and showcase why that is so, and also that how the opponent would fail the inherent nature of what the argument should have done and why the current situation cannot solve it. They just don't dabble into the idea that if just saying something is going to be more persuasive than the other thing, they just go ahead and prove it as well. The next secret is equally as important. The fourth one is talking about preparing the narrative. First, the evidence Second, beginners research topics, and experts reach stories. Preparing the narrative is not that complicated. First, you have to prepare the evidence. After you have done this, you do go ahead and run research stories. Beginners struggle at this point because they research topics rather than researching what ideally would look like the world around that particular topic. The audience remembers the narrative, not the spreadsheet. Your preparation should always begin with what is the simplest, most compelling story that I can tell. The narrative loop is also very important to consider here. You always have to start with an emotional example, person, a case study. It gives you much more relevancy and gives you the attention of the listener. Introduce the evidence to explain the phenomena and then return to the person to show the impact. That is how you move from being informative to being persuasive in your debate argument. The next secret, and the fifth one here, is the rule of three versus the rule of one. Beginners would try to make as many points as possible, often 7, 8, 9, or 10. They run out of time and dilute their message, not dealing with any of those 7 points expertly. However, pros use the rule of three for their overall case, three main pillars. This is not always critically true, but they're always going to be there in terms of how they're going to go ahead and assess what points are important. I would also recommend to you that you identify your three major impactful arguments and then run with them first before you move ahead and deal with anything else if you have any time left over. Pros would here use the rule of one for their opponent's case. You have to try to answer every one of your opponent's points. Find the single critical vulnerability, which is the rule of one, the one point that, if defeated, collapses their entire structure, and spend 80% of your time destroying it, which is called focalization or localizing on what your opponent's arguments are instead of like beating around the bush. The next secret, and the sixth one, is giving preemptive concessions. This is a secret weapon that uses honesty as leverage, and you would have seen a lot of debate rounds have this thing happen, where people are comparing the best and worst cases within the opponent's and your paradigms. A beginner ignores the biggest flaw in their own argument, hoping the opponent doesn't see it. An expert would bring in the problem first and neutralize it automatically. For example, you can state your flaw, like we concede that our policy will have an initial minor cost increase, then immediately pivot. However, we argue that the long term social benefit of X far outweighs this small transitional expense. You have stolen your opponent's strongest rebuttal and minimized its impact before they even speak. You would look honest here, confident, and prepared, and this is a great solution for dealing with opponents' cases. The next secret, and our seventh one, is a reverse burden question. When you feel overwhelmed by your opponent's claims, don't get defensive. Go on the offense. Subtly shift the burden of proof back onto them. This is a crucial psychological tactic. Practically, you can use this to directly refute a vague claim and ask a question that requires them to provide a massive amount of detail, which is often also something you can do when asking points of information. Our opponent claims this solution is too expensive. We have shown our budget. Where specifically in our budget does this math fail? Please demonstrate the exact line item and mechanism that creates this expense they claim. This could be one thing that you can use in any real world situation. But also in debate forums, this is also a practical example for you to take away your opponent's ideas and time from them. You force the opponents here to spend their limited time digging through the minute details rather than attacking your main points. Let's go into the last couple of secrets. The secrets from 8 to 10 are advanced and mastery of your own content. The eighth one is winning the judges and the audience and not the opponent. The biggest mistake a beginner makes is trying to win the argument against their opponent. The truth of the matter is, your opponent doesn't matter except for what they say and how you prove it against them. However, the judge or audience do matter because they are the ones who's going to give you the win, even if you're a public speaker or a debater at that particular point of time. So it is key that you cater to what the judge would need you to do. For example, practically looking at this situation, you would talk directly to the judge or audience in your summary. You can use phrases like the single question you, the judge, must answer today is, or what our opponent completely failed to prove to this audience was, or even that the major point in this debate or the major clash between the debate sides were these things and why we win it regardless. This makes the judge's job quite easy as well as the audience who is listening to you. Your structured summary can be the exact script the judge can use to write their decision down for you, which happens very easily if you do it properly. Here's the last word summary. The final speech should not be a rehashing of every point that has come before. It should be a comparison of the worlds that has been presented by both the government and opposing teams. You must paint two vivid pictures for the judge. The last word contrast here would be what would the world look like under our plan, where you describe vividly a positive, successful outcome linking back to your initial narrative, and what the world would look like under the opposition's plan or status quo, where you vividly describe a negative, painful consequence which can focus on the failure of their mechanisms and other structural issues. The last thing the judge hears is the emotional difference between victory and failure, as well as the last point that you can put in front of the judge itself. So, your last speech is very crucial when you're going ahead and giving this particular idea. The last secret is the 24-hour review, which is significantly tied to how you grow as a debater. The secret to rapid improvement is that a beginner leaves the round and moves on sometimes. However, somebody who is experienced and a pro at this game spends 24 hours reviewing the judge's specific feedback and identifying the single most critical flaw in their performance. Of course, this time frame is not something which is practical for everybody or something that is uniform for all people. But it is always encouraging that immediately after the round, you write down what you thought you won on and what you thought you lost on and take the judge's feedback. Use this to then compare what the other team has done or not done and why the judge's decision was done in the way that it was. The disconnect is your growth opportunity from what your idea or perception between you and your opponent is and what the judge has mentioned. It's not just about winning or losing at this point, it's about reducing the gap between your self assessment and the reality of the judging criteria that each format holds. Now, you have the playbook. You know that winning is about the warrant, about focalization, and about controlling the frame of the debate. These 10 secrets move you beyond simply talking at someone to strategically engaging them. Now, here's the question for you. Which of these 10 secrets do you think is the most underrated one? The one that, when used, creates the biggest surprise factor for your opponent? Let us know down in the comments below and also leave your thoughts down below on what else you would like to hear from us. Like this video if you're ready to start using the playbook of the pros, and subscribe for more content on critical thinking and communication mastery, and hit that notification bell icon to stay notified about all content coming out from our channel. Go out there and start winning those arguments. Good luck!